You, like me, are likely always looking for great reading recommendations, so here you go. This past week, I was reading one of the latest issues from one of my favorite writers, Ayanda Stood. You likely know her for her paradigm-shifting videos in which she opens our minds and teaches us how we can create a more loving society together. She also writes a Substack newsletter in which she both amplifies BIPOC and queer creators and writers and artists around the world and also shares her own work. In one of her most recent issues, I learned about an essay from Olufemi Taiwo, which is a welcome critique of the sort of homogenized idea that we have in Western cultures and that there just exists in pop culture and media discourse of pre-colonial Africa. Now, Professor Taiwo explains this so much better than I ever could, so I will just recommend that you go read the essay, but it is incredibly powerful. I learned so much that I didn't know. I've been a big fan of this author for quite a while now. Really incredible person who has written so many wonderful things. The book of Taiwo's that I've read is called Elite Capture: How the Powerful Took Over Identity, Politics, and Everything Else. It has a few different covers, as all books do. This is the cover that my book has. And I would also highly recommend that you read this. In it, he shares a story that many of us are familiar with, which is the parable of the naked emperor and the new clothes. So in the story, an emperor is convinced by a local person in his court that he is wearing clothes even though they are invisible. And so he goes out into the town naked, and the townspeople play along. And Taiwo uses this as a metaphor and an understanding for the sort of power dynamics that exist between the privileged and the non-privileged, between people who are intersectionally oppressed and people who are intersectionally powerful. And it was one of the just most concise and easily understandable metaphors I've ever seen in a book that basically speaks to the sort of indignities that people who are intersectionally oppressed must face on a daily basis, which in the world of this parable is having to pretend that this emperor is not naked. That same parable is, in that same classic myth story, however you want to categorize it, is used to in so many different political and philosophical discourses. But in this particular one, Taiwo is pointing out that for the average person in that town who doesn't have the power or influence that the emperor has, even though they recognize that this emperor is naked, they have to pretend that he has clothes on because they fear violence, because they live in a system like we do, in which anyone who is poor can face violence at any time from the state, from the powerful, from the rich, from people whose races or, monikers, intersectionally hierarchize them as more powerful. It's just such a brilliant book. I hope you go read it. Please read this essay. Please subscribe to Ayanda's newsletter.